Hey,
Ooh, live stream is on.
can you hear me?
Yep, you're good, Paul. A little
God,
quiet, but I can hear you okay.
wow, that was unnecessarily loud. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I'm almost to where I was driving to, just not quite yet.
Oh, do you want to hold off? I mean,
Uh, it's not a big deal. I know. I'm basically almost there. Just like 30 seconds away, basically.
okay.
Um, yeah, sorry about that. It was sort of a last minute uh, rescheduling there, but glad you guys could make it anyways.
Mhm.
Is Hans here?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Hey.
So, I mean, yeah, I guess you guys go ahead and go first.
So I've mostly been reporting tests, and reporting the tests have revealed like weird edge cases where we have EIR missing stuff or compiler missing stuff. It's all attached to the ElixirConf 2020 milestone. I mean, we don't actually need them for the conference. It's just the easiest way to group them right now on the off chance we do finish them in time. Like the big ones is right now, if I try to switch to the process raise and then write code that tries to catch, EIR invoke doesn't like that it's getting an array of I18. It thinks it needs to get a term, so like it doesn't compile.
You should just not even worry about that because all of that got rewritten.
Right. I assumed it was in your set of things that got rewritten. But it until it's ready to be merged, it's blocking me on porting the bad arg stuff.
I should have that merged today.
Okay.
Those fixes.
Does your set include things that change the map literals?
There's some changes to type stuff, but depending on the issue, I don't know. Most of the bugs that were already filed, I have fixes for, but not all of them, I don't think. I haven't looked through the most recent ones you reported.
Yeah, so map literal was a weird one where like you actually print unimplemented and it doesn't cause like a breaking problem, and so like map put isn't implemented, so it doesn't actually.
Oh, that's a ER thing. I don't think that's.
Okay. Well, wait, okay. Sorry, then I must have misunderstood. Okay, then it's maybe a thing that Hans needs to fix.
It's the IR printer, I think, is dumping that.
Oh, okay. I didn't investigate enough to figure that out. Good to know. The other ones are probably all like lower element stuff, which is probably in your fixes. Like improper lists and proper lists are wonky right now. UTF-8 binaries don't know they're UTF-8, so like it doesn't print correctly. Sub-binaries, so like bit strings where there's an actual like a partial byte are only heap binaries. So like they lose how many bits are supposed to be at the end, and they just assume they're the whole byte, which screws up like bit size stuff and things that like have to work differently on sub-binaries. I don't know if that's a. I don't
probably
know.
A runtime thing. In the implementation of the code that does the binary construction, or maybe it's matching you're talking about, but rather than that, it's probably not the compiler feeding it wrong information. It's just actually doing the construction incorrectly.
Well, the decode, it decodes it, and it thinks it's a heap binary for the type, not a sub binary. So it's not like the type is wrong too.
It thinks it's a heap binary, not a sub binary. Is that what you said?
Yeah. And it's not even a binary literal. Like it thinks it's a heap binary. I would have thought it was binary literal, if anything. But maybe we're not actually using binary literal. I don't know. But like I have the reproduction cases on that.
Well, yeah, we use binary literals, but for binaries that are based off a literal and get copied to the heap, those would end up being heap binaries.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean that's fine, but they're losing their.
It depends on the sequence of operations. I can look at the example. I think you opened an issue for that one. I just haven't looked at that one yet.
Yeah. So I'm just putting everything as issues because I know our Slack will lose history otherwise. So
Yeah, that's fine.
that's like, oh, there's a weird one where I don't know if it's the compiler or EIR, but if you put receive as the last expression in a function, it thinks that a block argument can't be found, and so it panics. Like if you do receive as the last thing, no
Yeah, I
good. If you
saw
do,
you open that issue. I think that one's probably fixed now too, but I'll double check that.
in your changes, you mean?
Uh, yeah.
Okay, okay. Because I'm up to date on EIR now with all the stuff that Hans has been doing. Um, literal
Yeah,
tuples.
no, it's not a change in EIR, although our branch of EIR is not the mainline branch. Uh, so
Well,
if you
I'm using the Lumen
switch to
branch.
use,
I've
oh,
been
okay.
I've been just putting fixes on
When you
there.
say you're up to date, have you pushed updates that branch?
I'm just putting everything on Lumen branch as well. The only changes there should be your changes to the dependencies like hash brown and Bumpalo, I think.
And then
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, it just happened last night, so like there's literal tuples are losing their settlement, which I think we talked about. Like we noticed before when we were pairing, so I think we knew about already, but I just opened it as an issue because I hit it again.
Yeah, I mean that one's another one that I probably fixed.
Okay.
I have a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So as soon as that one blocks testing anything that uses like prop lists for their options. So like that one will unlock being able to test a bunch of stuff. And then other than that, mostly just been throwing gen server and rand. Gen server because like we know stuff needs gen servers all over the place for the test frameworks, and rand because we know we need rand to be able to do prop test. And so I'm just been running those every time Hans or you gets a fix to see what is still broken with compiling them.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so the big thing for like not bugs is I got the integration test for cancel timer working, which to get that I had to get receive after working, and so receive after works now, and it interacts correctly with like timer started with start timer and those timers. So we now have like the equivalent of what I think Beam calls system timers, and the one we have right now is just stop waiting, where it'll wake it up. And I made sure that it only starts one timer ever for like a given receive context, and then it automatically cleans it up when it's done, and it doesn't start one again. So that even if you're woken up because you got a message, if it doesn't match, you don't start a new timer, so it works correctly with the way it's supposed to work for after. And which is great because we can also do receive after just a time to also make timers and stuff. And like that is the thing that's supposed to work, and it does work. So that's great.
Yeah, that is nice to have that functional now.
Yeah, once your invoke stuff lands, we will have both receive after and try catch, which should be the main blockers to be able to do a gen server loop. Even if like the gen server file itself can't be built, we can at least do like our own implementation of one and prove that it like works.
I mean,
the main thing that's go ahead, Hans.
The fact that the gen server file is failing on parsing stuff. I mean, I must have made changes to that since we compiled it last.
I know we had run it through the parser a long time ago.
Yeah, so I guess it's not like big fixes we need to make there, but then there's the lowering of it and stuff too. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, the bulk of the changes that I have been held up because of some upstream work that needed to happen on MLR. So I discovered that the way that they were representing the invoke operation in MLIR was incorrect, and ultimately started causing verification errors when doing lowering of certain modules. Like I have one that can reproduce it and a bunch that can't using catch. So I essentially have rewritten how that works in both Lumen and in MLIR. And so that came with a handful of changes. part of that work also is integrating with recent upstream changes to the LVM dialect. So they reworked the type system. So I had to integrate those changes, but there are some nice things that follow that. So it's definitely worth um, getting that done. And then, in the process of refactoring a bunch of that stuff, I ended up fixing, a handful of those issues that you had opened, Luke. I had actually started fixing a bunch of those before I started working on Invoke. Hit the issue with Catch, started looking at that, and then went down that rabbit hole. So uh, the Invoke stuff I finished up last night, and there's one other thing I need to fix today with the type conversion that was failing, but that's the last thing that's really holding um, anything up at this point. So with that fixed, I can merge all those changes, and we can reevaluate, some of those tickets and see if there's still issues or not.
Yeah, I think I might have accidentally opened 2 issues for Invoke because I just realized that I one about Catch and one directly about Invoke, and they're probably the same problem. So
Could be, yeah. I mean, if you're seeing issues like lowering stuff um, in MLIR, it's almost certainly something that I've already seen and fixed as part of these changes. If it's runtime behavior, that's different because I may not have hit that. But anything cogen wise, I almost certainly have been working on. But you might as well open the issues anyways, because even if they look similar, you never know if there's um, something slightly different that makes that one happen in that one case, but not any of the others. If you're getting the same error, like something about verification with lowering one of the operations, then that one's probably going to happen every time. So you don't need to open up duplicates for those. But you know, just because it's all related to exceptions doesn't mean that it's all necessarily caused by the same underlying problem. So no
yeah,
worries.
and I have to remember to always check when I think I get a bad input to check both in the list form and in the root form because it might just be a lower element value thing because we have to
Right.
handle the different formats when lowering the elements.
Yeah, that's one area where some things have improved a little bit. I still need to clean up some of the code around that, but I don't need to do that as part of what I'm merging today. Uh, Namely, they added some stuff upstream that allows me to do stuff like materialize cast only when needed, instead of having sort of preemptively cast a bunch of things, which is kind of nice. Um,
Wait, does that mean
just in general, the type system stuff is.
we potentially could get rid of the cast to term and then it would only have to materialize when we actually need a term for the EIR call?
It depends on where we're doing the casting,
Okay.
but yeah, that's kind of the implication. Is that um, once the initial module is generated, when you generate the IR the very first time, that IR has the type check. It doesn't materialize cast at that point. But when you're doing conversions and it's, you know, converting operation and the types get converted, if it thinks it needs to materialize cast to make the types check, um, it now has infrastructure to do that on demand. So I just write the materialization function and they handle injecting it where it's needed. Um, we still need to lower modules with a lot of preemptive casts simply because we don't have a type system in place yet. But I definitely want to get to a point where we can, start to get rid of some of that. The more type information we have, the more redundant IR we can remove, and the faster the compiler will work. Um, so all those things are good. Plus, we can fold a bunch of operations if we know the types up front. If we don't know the types, we have to sort of assume that we don't know anything, which means that we miss a lot of easy optimizations. Um, in fact, there's a bunch of optimizations I haven't even bothered to write simply because it's not worth it. If they're never going to run, because the types aren't there. So, yeah, I'm trying to think what else was significant to bring up. Yeah, I think the one item I'm looking at now that I've rewritten the exception stuff, I'm going to basically do it once I've got my changes merged today, is how it impacts recursion with the exception handling stuff in play. I may have to do something, take a different approach to errors in the runtime if it's using those exceptions is too detrimental to tail call optimization. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Point being that if using invoke always prohibits, optimizing tail calls, then the only approach we have is to capture those errors in the runtime and use some kind of, sentinel term value like none to branch against. But it's, I really don't want to have to go that route. And I know that at least in x86-64, using invoke does not necessarily mean tail calls are not emitted or eliminated, sorry, but it is not something I'm 100% confident in. I have some tests that specifically exercise TCO, so we'll see how those get impacted now that all that stuff got rewritten.
Until we know that, should I hold off switching to process raise?
I'm trying to think here. I don't think you need to, simply because what we can do even with process raise is essentially catch, unwind, and rust instead of raising a Erlang panic, raise a rust panic that we capture and then handle returning the appropriate value. The benefit of process raise is that it essentially just jumps over all the rust frames. It does all the cleanup, of course, because it's still, those frames are still in stack, but we don't have to handle it in the runtime. It only gets handled in the Erlang code where we want it to be handled. So, but with some slight changes, we can make it work the other way if we need to.
Okay.
So there's some benefits.
Because like the way I was able to change it was pretty simple. I just had to change the macro we use for NIFs to do process raise. So
Right.
it's not that big of a change. Mostly it makes the harder to write the Rust test, which is why I didn't want to do it until catch worked, because then I can get rid of all the ones that currently have to be in Rust because of the bad arg.
Right.
The only thing we'll lose with catch is that unless I make, I mean, I could always make a built-in for this, is sometimes some of the Rust bad arg checks don't just check the bad arg. They check that like they have our better error messages. And right now I can't catch it and do that. If I just have it printed though, I can. So I might have to.
The better error messages you're talking about is really just a stack trace though, right?
Yeah, it only prints when like the runtime is printing the error out. So it only happens if like the process would exit. If you catch it, you can't see it.
Sure. I think one thing to keep in mind is that when I add in the unwinding support, we'll be able to capture stack traces along with those with process raise. Right now, depending on the situation, you're probably not going to get one at all.
Well, the text isn't even part of the stack
working.
trace, because we have to maintain compatibility with the what is it? It's it's a tuple with like exit all in caps, so it's like a single quote atom, and then another tuple with like the actual
You're talking
reason,
about something different though.
and the stack trace. No, like the better error message is that inside of our actual runtime exception, the anyhow error is buried inside there. And if we get to the point where we exit, we have our log exit print that error message where we're like, instead of just a bad arg, we can say like, no, this specific argument is where you fucked up. And we could do it as printing because it didn't cause an incompatibility. But I have to think of some way of like making up something, some function where like,
well,
it
the
would
process race stuff at least is storing the runtime exception that's generated, which should have the inner anyhow value. If set, I think the way I wrote it, I wasn't ever setting the stack trace value or the inner error, but that is an option for those cases that we can capture.
And I can just make a function that allows us to capture the Lumen like info better, because I already did that with so that I could write Erlang tests. I wrote an is big integer and is small integer, so that I could in the Erlang test like assert that this is a big integer in case I like fuck up what the boundary is between small and big integers for a given bit size. Especially because it's different in the NAND boxing than it is in the other one also. And so we have those now, and so I would just put them in the Lumen module to do the like intrinsics to be able to get that data out.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some improvements we can make to all that to make sure that we're, preserving all that information that we're generating above and beyond what Erlang normally does, at least for the bad arg errors. Honestly, there's a handful of errors that are like that. Essentially, all those built-in function error atoms tell you nothing about what actually happened. Like bad arith is kind of like, well, cool, so I know something was wrong with the math here, but I don't know what. And it's only if you actually get the inner exception message do you figure out what happened. But I think probably the best thing to do there, aside from any sort of like obvious improvements, is to wait until I add in the backtraces and see how that plays out in terms of what information we have, how that helps us accumulate things like the Erlang version of the stack trace and so on. I think we're probably going to need some configuration with process raise to basically, determine whether or not we capture certain information. Like one thing that seems clear to me is that we wouldn't necessarily always want to reify the Erlang stack trace, but we need to capture the addresses. So probably a process raise where we know that we're going to use that stack trace, we can generate it as we're unwinding, versus having to essentially generate that stack trace a second time. We unwind first for the exception handling, but then do another unwind to like map the actual addresses to, places in the code. But if we know that we're actually going to use the stack trace, then while we're doing the unwind for the exception handling, we can also build up the Erlang stack trace.
Yeah,
that's just an easy optimization. Or we can elide it entirely, depending on the situation. And some of that the compiler will know, some of it maybe the runtime will know. It depends on what the exception is,
I think we could do the equivalent of, how you're supposed to in the newer versions of OTP where you have to say you're going to use the stack trace, but it's still optional. We would just enforce it instead. And like even if you pattern match out the stack trace, if we can show you don't print it and you don't use it, we'd be like, we're not going to generate the stack trace. Because nothing bad will happen. And so we won't use the term form of the stack trace. And also if you don't use I don't know what the equivalent of the Erlang _ stack trace is from Elixir, but whatever that is. If you don't capture it, then like we're not going to do it. And then that way we don't have to go through the trouble of generating it, which means we save a lot of allocation space for all those that list of tuples.
It's actually easier with the Erlang syntax because the capture of the trace is explicit.
Is it just that if you put that third argument for stack trace in the catch line, is that what the equivalent is?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you bind that variable, then you know that you're using that trace. Whereas in Elixir, I mean, I think it lowers to that basically. But the thing I'm not certain about is whether it always binds that third value, regardless of whether or not the underscore stack trace stuff is present.
Oh yeah, if they're lazy and they always do it, then
code to see.
Yeah. Yeah, because in Elixir is used in a weird way where like you put the special double underscore like where you're going to use it for the re-raise, so it's not at the catch point, so it's more separated.
Yeah. I think that's probably where I'm going to focus my attention next after addressing whatever outstanding bugs are left after I merge my stuff today, is get the back traces working. Once we have that functional, I feel like that enables a lot more, or at least makes things a lot more practical to use. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's super essential right now. Like I said, there's a few of the binary things that are not implemented.
Do you still have doubts that the spawn thing is working, or is the thing we paired on with minimal where the runnable, is that all the fix we need? You know, where we were going to hollow out runnable so that it didn't do anything since you already signed up the stack in the spawn internal?
Oh, right. Yeah, did I make that change already locally? I'll have to double check.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll need to revisit that and see where things sit there. But
yeah, I haven't tested any of the spawns yet, so
I think I did change that locally just to, test it out and make sure it worked. But I'll have to verify that.
Okay.
If not, then depending on how the tests go, I know what I didn't do is test switching over to have the built-in use liblumen OTPs spawn.
Okay.
I think I made the code change we talked about, but haven't tested it yet. So
okay, I haven't overridden any of the built-ins to use OTP stuff either. Since you said to wait for your stuff to land.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can probably do that sort of all in one go, more or less. A lot of those changes are super straightforward. Some of them, I think the main thing is probably going to be changing the representation of the operation and MLIR so that we can provide an overriding symbol to use. Kind of the problem that made it more painful, to do the change even while I have changes in flight is that, it's sort of structured to optimize like generating all these operations. They're essentially duplicates of each other.
Yeah, it did look like the current code for not, you had to like copy the entire body of the function to just change how built-in symbol was generated. So that seemed not great to override everyone to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
because otherwise it just uses the template.
It just hard codes that built-in symbol everywhere, and I think probably can just change that to require passing in the whole name. The reason why I wanted to just take away the prefix is just remove some noise, but and I figured that those built-ins would be pretty stable, which they are. It's just we don't need them with liblumen and OTP there. So I don't think there's any issue with, removing the convenience of that prefix and instead specify the whole name. But since I had a bunch of other changes in that file, rather than try and merge that together, it's easier to just do that as soon as my stuff is merged.
Yeah, that's fine.
And also it just makes sure that, the tests I do to make sure that my changes are functioning the way they're supposed to, don't get impacted by testing against something was previously untested. You know what I mean?
Right. I haven't tested any of the runtime version of the functions because the compiled code uses the built-ins, as we discovered.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the hang up there is really just getting that stuff merged as soon as I finish fixing the one bug with the type conversion. So I'm guessing sometime middle afternoon. I have some other meetings for the next like 2 hours or so, but
yes, it's okay that you have another job. Like,
well, I mean, I was gonna try and get this stuff done by Monday, but I wasn't able to work on really anything at all until yesterday. I worked on it over the weekend, of course, but ran out of time. But I haven't touched it at all until last night. Just had too much other stuff to work on. So I know that was blocking you, but I didn't want to hold you up too much longer than I have already. So.
I mean, they're blockers, but I just move on to the next BIF. So until we get to the point where all 177 are blocked by some bug, like I'll be fine.
Plenty to do, yeah.
Yeah.
On the EIR front,
you're cutting out a bit for me.
The location changes you made, but I'm sorry. Did I break up or something?
Is it my connection that's bad, or is it?
I only heard that you integrated the location changes he made. Everything else cut out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was all I said.
Okay.
So I integrated the location changes that you made, Hans, but I haven't checked to see if you've made any further improvements there. But it was enough to fix the missing debug information that was preventing us from having optimizations on by default.
Awesome. That's another huge win.
So, like last week or so, I disabled that by default. So you probably didn't notice that that's no longer happening.
There are a couple of more issues I know about. So, like, what I've been doing is I've been writing some tests for location stuff. Just like making sure that all paths are covered in the passes. So, I mean, I'll be pushing that up and hopefully like fix more stuff as time goes. But yeah, hopefully it's good news that it compiles.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, it's compiling correctly, but the debug information is still not particularly useful yet. But, the more of that is present, we should start seeing improvements when stepping through the code. So, anytime you make
is that on the Lumen branch, or is it just on your?
That's on the Lumen branch right now.
Okay, so since we're using the Lumen branch, does that mean I can on the test turn off the zero optimization? Or is it only with the changes on your stuff event push that it also works?
I think it's beneficial to leave the optimizations off for the base set of tests. The reason being that what you're really testing is the runtime functionality, and the optimization takes longer to compile, but also doesn't, if the compilation fails due to those optimizations, it's going to give you a test failure that doesn't represent what actually failed.
Yeah. I can always
we'll have a separate set of tests, mostly around CodeGen, that tests optimizations.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We'll test it separately. That's fine.
So I'll do my update if it's a good time.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we have been working on tests for location, but on Monday I updated the hash brown and bump below crates to the latest nightly that had all of the components that I needed, which was like late last month. But it turns out that they have a new set of changes to the alloc traits that they're not major, but they just split up some functions again that they merged earlier. So we'll probably want to at least wait for those to make it into nightly versions with all the components we need. And other than that, just like fixing some small things that have come up. Yeah.
Right on.
I'm just really looking forward to when we can get Lumen and EIR on the same nightly version by default.
I mean, I think we can do it after the conference. I just know last time changing to the new alloc thing was a huge change, and I don't want to risk it since it'll impact GC, and we've always had weird bugs with a lot of GC whenever we change it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've changed all of that already. The thing that remains is shifting our dependencies to a common version.
Oh no,
Right now
they changed it, so we'd have to change ours again because they like Rust changed what the trait signature a little bit.
What did they change this time?
They keep 0 as an argument, but they changed about in place is now different functions instead of an argument.
So
okay.
So the version Lumen on this right now is the one where you just have the grow and shrink functions and alloc and dealloc.
I believe so.
Because then it shouldn't be like the only difference is that the maze move is now not an argument anymore, and I think that's the only thing pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we should be pretty close to at parity with what's upstream, but yeah, I guess if there's another set of changes, we'll have to check. I mean, to your point, Luke, about the garbage collection stuff, the key thing is making sure that when those changes happen, that we preserve the current behavior. So I think the changes at this point are so minimal that we're not really at risk of changing the behavior. We just have to make sure that if like they move the default behavior to another function, that we start calling that function instead of the previous one. So if they moved like the placement stuff to different functions now, then that one is the one that we'd have to be the most careful of when we port over to it. But I think we can probably do that as soon as those changes stabilize.
And it was mostly with 3 weeks left, and we know we have like issues in our own code, like EIR or compiler stuff. We should do those because sticking on old Rust is a stable base for us. And like right after the conference, we switch over and do the Rust update.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think by then it's gonna. Yeah, we're all on the same page then.
Also, I didn't check if any of the Rust people that are doing the alloc stuff were affected by the Mozilla layoff. So I don't know if you heard that.
How many were laid off?
250, a quarter of the workforce, and it affected the entire Servo team, the entire MDN team. Nick Fitzgerald and Lynn Clark are still at Mozilla, but I'm not sure about other people. Dan Goman, who was like, one of the lead WASI people, is gone from Mozilla. So that's going to affect at least WASI. And Dan did a bunch of stuff with like WASM time and like all the actual implementations of WASM. So I don't know. Like, I'm sure Rust will survive and enough people use it now, but like the Mozilla parts of Rust are probably affected.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Firefox now is written on top of Rust, so they're still going to invest in the engineering effort for some time. At least as long as they're investing in Firefox. But Mozilla without Firefox would be not really Mozilla anymore.
Well, their thing was they're going to focus on products, so they're trying to make other products besides Firefox because they don't get paid for Firefox. And
right, but Firefox is the thing that buys them all the goodwill and the the name recognition and things like that. Without Firefox, they lose what little name recognition they have outside of super technical people like ourselves. So
yeah,
I don't know.
On
they
Twitter,
would have to go way off the rails to stop and
on Twitter, people from JSC, which is Apple's JavaScript core, were trying to recruit them, but mind you, it was engineers, so I don't know if Apple itself will do it. But it'll be interesting if Apple actually speaks up at the WASM meetings, since they're usually pretty silent.
Yeah, I'm not sure why their team is not super involved in the process, but I think there's maybe some beef between those engineers and the Chrome and Firefox ones.
I do know
why you talk about
the one JSC guy did get salty that JSC implemented tail calls in JavaScript and no one else did. Like he called them out at the Spain meeting, and also just so I forget who it is that was JSC, but he at least was very big on making sure that Google doesn't win the internet. But in the actual WASM meetings, most of the time, they don't. As far as I can tell, there's only one guy that I know that I think is on JSC. But other than that, they don't seem to speak up that much. So I don't know if they're just privately making sure that Google doesn't take everything over, but it definitely weakens Mozilla holding Google in place.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, people are pretty well on the same page about a lot of stuff. So barring any major features or changes to how things work, I don't think there's a whole lot of reason for some of those guys to speak up. It really depends on who's spearheading a feature, and I think a lot of the ongoing proposals
Paul froze.
Mm.
Did he freeze for you, Hans?
Yeah, he's come. Yeah, server team affected. Can you hear me? Am I present?
I can hear you, Hans.
Okay, nice.
I just noticed when you click our little signal strength thing, it tells us which version of Amazon we're connected to.
Oh, really?
It says US East 1, yeah. Yours is probably different because, well, no, it says you're connected to US East 1. That's just weird. Why would they use... Oh, all gone.
Yeah, there you go. Do you have much left?
No, I dumped everything from GitHub in my brain, so I am good. I mean, mostly dumping it here is everyone can look at GitHub, but if people want to watch the video, might be a way to get them to look at it.
Yeah. I guess we wait a little bit if he wants to rejoin, but
yeah,
generally, yeah.
He's away on Slack though too. Maybe his connection in general was gone.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we can. It seemed like he was pretty done as well, so we can just mention it in Slack and then call it, I guess.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
Bye-bye.